I never thought a monthly family dinner would be the night my carefully built life would implode. I'm Isabella Moreira, 34 years old, and I was sitting at my parents' dining table, the same one where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays for decades, trying to ignore the tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Mom's critical glances swept over me. Dad maintained his characteristic silence, and my sister Emily wore an unusual smirk that made my stomach tighten. The familiar suburban home with its floral wallpaper and family photos felt suffocating that evening, and I found myself mentally calculating how soon I could politely excuse myself. We'd been discussing mundane neighborhood gossip and Emily's recent vacation to Bali, complete with Instagram-perfect photos that I knew cost more than she could afford. The conversation had been flowing like molasses, but I was playing my part, asking appropriate questions about her resort, and feigning interest in Mom's updates about church committee. Politics. Then, without warning, Emily's demeanor changed. She set down her wine glass with deliberate precision, pushed back her chair, and stood up dramatically, her hands planted firmly on the table. "I have something important to share with everyone," she announced, eyes laser-focused on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "She's been hiding millions. My sister is worth $8 million while watching us struggle." The words hung in the air for a suspended moment before chaos erupted. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. Mom's hand flew to her pearl necklace, and I felt the color drain from my face. How did she know the financial details of my life were meticulously private? Before I could gather my thoughts, Mom's expression transformed from shock to calculation, faster than I could blink. She nodded slowly as if Emily's revelation simply confirmed a long-held suspicion, then locked eyes with me. "So you'll pay for Emily's mortgage, right? She's underwater by $200,000. The directness of it, the immediate pivot to what I could provide rather than how I'd achieved anything, knocked the wind from me. Around the table, I could see the shift in everyone's expressions from surprise to expectation, from family members to shareholders awaiting their dividend. Words failed me completely, as my throat constricted with emotion. I said nothing yet. But in that moment of stunned silence, something hardened inside me that would eventually find its voice. My relationship with money began when I was 12 years old. Long before I had any significant amount of it, I started a dog-walking business in our neighborhood, printing flyers at the library and going door to door after school. While most kids my age were watching TV or playing video games, I was learning responsibility and the value of hard work, one pooper scooper at a time. When I proudly showed my parents the $67 I'd earned in my first month, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's nice, honey. Don't forget to do your math homework," he said, while my mother was busy hemming Emily's costume for her upcoming dance recital. At 9 years old, Emily was already the golden child, delicate, artistic, and demanding of attention in a way that I never was. My parents never missed one of her performances, the auditorium seats permanently indented with the shape of their enthusiastic applause. Our family had its dynamics firmly established. Margaret, my mother, a high school English teacher obsessed with appearances and social. Standing Robert, my father, an accountant who disappeared into spreadsheets rather than facing family conflict. Emily, my younger sister by 3 years, who had mastered the art of being the center of attention. And me, the practical, independent child who learned early that self-reliance was my only reliable option. The contrast in how we handled money was evident from our birthday gifts. I would carefully save the checks from relatives, depositing them into the savings account I'd begged my parents to help me open. Meanwhile, Emily would spend her birthday money before the wrapping paper hit the floor, usually on trendy clothes or concert tickets. My interest in finances deepened in high school when I met Mrs. Chen, my economics teacher who recognized something in me that my family never seemed to notice. "You have a mind for business, Isabella," she told me after I'd completed an extra credit project analyzing a public company's quarterly report. "Most adults don't understand profit margins the way you do." Under her mentorship, I joined the Junior Business Leaders Club and spent lunches learning about investment strategies, while my classmates gossiped in the cafeteria. When I was 16, I won the state junior business leaders competition with a proposal for a subscription-based pet care service, an evolution of my dog-walking business. The day of the award ceremony, I scanned the audience repeatedly, hoping to see my parents' faces. but the seats I'd remained empty. My father had texted me that morning, "Emily's regional cheerleading competition is today. Good luck with your presentation." I accepted my trophy on stage with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Mrs. Chen's encouraging nod from the sidelines, the only recognition I received. That evening I returned home to find the house empty. They were still celebrating Emily's team placing third at a post-competition dinner. I placed my trophy on my desk and started my homework, swallowing the disappointment that had become all too familiar when they finally returned home. Emily bouncing with excitement in her glittery uniform. I mentioned my win. My mother was loading the dishwasher when I told her, and she barely paused in her task. "That's nice, dear. Did you see Emily's routine? Her coach says she could get a scholarship," she said, her face lighting up as she turned toward my sister. That night, I stared at my trophy in the darkness of my bedroom, while downstairs the living room display cabinet showcased Emily's growing collection of cheerleading medals and participation ribbons. This was the first minor hurt that planted the seed of a realization. In my family, my success would always be a footnote to Emily's story. Northwestern University became my sanctuary, a place where achievement was actually celebrated. I'd earned a partial scholarship and worked 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore to cover the remaining costs. While other students complained about early morning classes, I was up at 5 a.m. to review financial reports before my shift started. Double majoring in finance and computer science meant my social life was practically non-existent, but I was driven by something deeper than the desire for weekend parties. During my sophomore year, I began developing an investment algorithm as part of a computational finance project. What started as an academic exercise became an obsession as I recognized its potential. Using the $3,000 I'd saved from my campus job, I tested my algorithm in the real market. Within 6 months, that initial investment had grown to $15,000 a return that validated both my approach and my instincts. While my classmates received care packages and regular calls from home, my phone only rang when Emily needed help with a paper, or when my parents remembered to check in, usually with questions about when I'd be visiting or if I could help Emily with her community college applications. The contrast between my academic environment, where professors valued my insights, and my family dynamics, where I remained peripheral, grew sharper with each passing semester. After graduation, I landed a position at Meridian Capital, a prestigious investment firm in Chicago. The starting salary was impressive for a new graduate, but what excited me most was the opportunity to learn from industry veterans. Meanwhile, Emily had dropped out of community college after 3 semesters, declaring it too restrictive for her creative spirit. My apartment in Chicago's River North neighborhood became my true home, a place where I could pursue my ambitions without apologizing for them. It was at a financial technology conference that I met Jason Kim, a tech entrepreneur who recognized something in my questions during his presentation. "You're thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room," he told me over coffee afterward. "Have you ever considered building something of your own?" That conversation sparked a partnership that would change my life. Within 6 months, I'd left Meridian to join Jason in creating Capital Flow, a fintech platform that used advanced algorithms to optimize investment strategies for small to medium businesses, an evolution of the project I'd started in college. We worked 18-hour days out of a tiny office, living on caffeine and determination. When we secured our first round of venture capital funding, $1 million to expand our team and refine our platform, I was ecstatic. That night, I called my parents, eager to share the news that validated years of hard work. "Mom, we got the funding, $1 million to grow Capital Flow," I exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement in my apartment. There was a pause on the line before my mother responded. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Listen, Emily's having some trouble with her rent this month. Her roommate moved out unexpectedly, and she's short about $3,000. Since you're doing so well now, I was hoping you might be able to help her out." The abrupt pivot from my achievement to Emily's needs felt like a bucket of cold water. "I can send her something," I replied, my enthusiasm deflating like a punctured balloon after transferring the money to Emily, who sent a quick text, "Sis, text." In response, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the takeout containers and empty coffee cups that testified to the work that had led to our funding success. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I realized that no matter what I achieved, my family would never see me as anything more than a resource to solve Emily's problems. The distance between us wasn't just geographical anymore. It was a fundamental disconnect in values and recognition. As capital flow grew, so did the emotional gap between my family and me. Each success widened the chasm, not because I was pulling away, but because they couldn't see past their preconceptions of who I was and what mattered. It was the second significant hurt in a pattern that would continue for years. My achievements rendered invisible while my ability to provide financial support remained the only measure of my worth to them. By the time Emily turned 25, she had cycled through 7 jobs in 3 years. Retail positions, administrative roles, a brief stint as a personal trainer. Each one abandoned when it became too limiting, or when a supervisor had unreasonable expectations like consistent punctuality. Despite her employment instability, Emily's lifestyle defied her income constraints. Her Instagram feed showcased designer handbags, weekend getaways to coastal resorts, and meals at restaurants where appetizers cost more than I spent on entire dinners. During one of my rare visits home, I witnessed Emily's shopping addiction firsthand. We were supposed to have lunch together, a sisterly bonding activity our mother had orchestrated, but our quick stop at the mall turned into a 3-hour shopping spree. "I need this for work," Emily declared, adding a $400 blazer to her growing collection of purchases despite having quit her office job the previous week. "And these are perfect for my weekend in Nashville." Next month, she added, selecting 2 pairs of designer boots priced at over $300 each. When we finally reached the register, Emily's total exceeded $2,000. Without blinking, she produced 3 different credit cards, splitting the charges between them. "Had to spread it around," she explained with a wink when she noticed my expression. "I'm pretty close to the limit on all of them." That evening at dinner, Emily casually announced she was quitting her current job as a receptionist at a hair salon. "I need to find myself," she declared, twirling pasta around her fork. "I'm thinking of traveling for a while, maybe Southeast Asia. It's supposed to be life-changing." My father nodded thoughtfully while my mother beamed. "That sounds wonderful, honey. Travel is such an education." Neither of them asked the obvious question: how would she finance this journey of self-discovery? The answer came 3 months later, when Emily returned from Bali with a tan, dozens of spiritual enlightenment quotes to share on social media, and $22,000 in credit card debt. "The exchange rate was confusing," she explained with a shrug, as my parents gathered around their dining table, credit card statements spread before them. I watched from the doorway as my father sighed, removed his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We'll figure it out, Emily. We always do." They liquidated a portion of their retirement fund to pay off Emily's debt, a financial decision that made my stomach clench with anxiety for their future. 2 weeks after the Bali bailout, my mother called to discuss Emily's engagement to Brad, a self-described real estate developer, whose actual career seemed to consist of endlessly almost closing property deals. "We're so excited," my mother gushed Emily's thinking. "June for the wedding of course it will be quite an affair. She deserves the best." The conversation pivoted precisely as I'd come to expect. "We know you're doing well at that company of yours. Emily's thinking about the Westlake Country Club for the reception. Since your father and I are covering the ceremony and her dress, we hoped you might contribute to the reception costs. Around $20,000 should cover it." The request hit me like a physical blow. "Mom, that's a lot of money," I said. "Have Emily and Brad considered something more aligned with their budget?" My mother's tone cooled immediately. "This is your sister's special day. Isabella, we've always made sacrifices for family. Your father and I are reorganizing the house to help with wedding expenses. Emily says you have a good job. Surely you can contribute to your only sister's happiness." That was the third significant hurt, the expectation that I should drain my savings for an extravagant wedding, while my parents endangered their retirement security. The wedding was every bit as lavish as Emily had planned, with a final price tag approaching $100,000. My parents smiled through the celebration, though I noticed the new lines around my father's eyes, and the way my mother's laugh had a brittle edge. I contributed the requested amount, telling myself it was an investment in family peace, though the return on that investment proved questionable at best. 3 months after returning from a honeymoon in the Maldives, partially funded by my wedding gift, Emily and Brad began house hunting in an upscale neighborhood where homes started at 7 figures. "We found the perfect place," Emily announced during a Sunday call. 5 bedrooms, pool, home theater room to grow into. When I asked about the financing, her answer confirmed my fears. Mom and Dad are helping with the down payment, but we were hoping you could chip in too. Just 50,000 or so. Brad's got a big development deal coming through next month, so we can pay you back." Then I declined as gently as possible, suggesting they consider a starter home instead. Emily didn't speak to me for 2 months afterward, and my mother's calls became pointed discussions about family loyalty. The pattern was set in stone. Emily's financial irresponsibility yielded no consequences because someone, usually our parents, occasionally me, would always come to the rescue. Each bailout reinforced her behavior while depleting our parents' security and testing the limits of my patience. The most troubling aspect wasn't Emily's spending, but my parents' enabling response and their expectation that I would follow suit. Regardless of the financial strain or fundamental unfairness of the situation, the email arrived on a Tuesday morning, its subject line deceptively mundane. Capital flow. Acquisition final terms. I was in the middle of a team meeting when my phone buzzed and I excused myself to take the call from our legal team. "It's done," our attorney said, her voice betraying more emotion than I'd heard from her in 3 years of working together. The board approved the final terms. The deal closes next Friday. After 4 years of 16-hour days, missed holidays, and sacrificed weekends, Capital Flow was being acquired by Vert.x Financial, a major financial services company that wanted our proprietary algorithm and client base. My share of the acquisition was $4. $2 million number, so large it didn't feel real. As I stared at the documents later that evening, Jason popped a bottle of champagne in our office. The small team that had built something valuable enough to attract a company, valued at billions, celebrating our validation. To making something from nothing. He toasted, and we clinked glasses as the reality began to sink in. That night alone in my apartment, I allowed myself to feel the magnitude of what had happened. Financial security. Real lasting. Security was now mine. No more anxiety about emergency funds or retirement planning. No more mental calculations about whether I could afford both the dental work I'd been postponing and the security deposit on a better apartment. But as the initial euphoria settled into a steady warmth of accomplishment, I made a deliberate decision. My lifestyle would change only modestly, and my newfound wealth would remain private. The reasons were practical at first. I'd seen how lottery winners and sudden inheritors often lost everything through poor planning and impulsive decisions. I wanted to be thoughtful about my next steps. But there was another reason, one I acknowledged only in the quietest moments of honesty with myself. I knew exactly what would happen if my family discovered the extent of my wealth. I purchased a beautiful but not ostentatious condo in Chicago's CERT Gold Coast neighborhood, an upgrade from my rental, but nothing that screamed multimillionaire. I continued working as a consultant, partly for the intellectual challenge and partly to have a simple answer to the question, what do you do? My investment strategy focused on diversification and long-term growth rather than flashy high-risk ventures. A significant portion of my wealth went into establishing a foundation that provided STEM scholarships for young women from middle-class backgrounds, girls like I had been with ambition but limited resources. This particular investment gave me more satisfaction than any luxury purchase could have. The Christmas after the acquisition, I flew home with carefully selected gifts, thoughtful but not extravagant. Emily greeted me in the driveway, showing off her new Range Rover with animated excitement. "Isn't it gorgeous? Brad got it for me as an early Christmas present," she exclaimed. Running her hand lovingly over the hood, I later learned from my father that the SUV was financed at a punishing interest rate with payments that strained their monthly budget. The disparity between our approaches to money had never been more apparent. Inside, my mother fussed over Emily's new diamond earrings while barely glancing at the cashmere sweater I'd brought her. "Emily has such exquisite taste," she said, admiring the sparkling stones. "It's so nice that she can be generous even when she doesn't have much. You could learn from her giving spirit." Isabella. I excused myself to the bathroom where I pulled out my phone and checked my investment app. A habit that had become almost compulsive since the acquisition. The screen showed my current assets $5, $6 million, and growing steadily. I stared at the number, then at my reflection in the mirror, and made a silent promise to myself, they'll never know. And that's better for everyone. The decision to hide my wealth wasn't about deception, but self-preservation. I'd seen how money changed relationships, how it transformed family members into supplicants and friends into opportunists. The fortune I'd built through work and calculated risks was the foundation of my independence, and I wasn't willing to sacrifice that independence on the altar of family expectations. This was the fourth significant hurt in my journey. The realization that I couldn't share one of my greatest achievements with the people who should have been most proud of me, because their response would inevitably transform my success into an obligation to solve their financial problems. Instead of celebrating my accomplishment, they would see only what I could provide. So I buried the truth beneath consultant business cards and modest holiday gifts, protecting both my assets and what remained of our relationship. 3 years after the Capital Flow acquisition, my net worth had grown to $8 million through careful investments and continued consulting work. I'd found a balance that worked for me: challenging professional projects, meaningful philanthropic efforts, and a small circle of genuine friends who knew me before I had wealth and treated me no differently after my relationship with my family had settled into a predictable pattern. Monthly phone calls with my parents, occasional text exchanges with Emily, and the requisite holiday gatherings where I played my role as the responsible older sister with the stable but unremarkable career. The first hint that something had changed came in the form of an article in Chicago Business Quarterly, featuring 40 under 40 professionals making an impact in the financial sector. The piece mentioned my role in developing Capital Flow's algorithm and the subsequent acquisition by Vertex Financial. Though it didn't specify financial details, I thought nothing of it. The magazine had a limited circulation, and my family had never shown interest in business publications. What I didn't realize was that Emily had developed a habit of Googling both me and Jason whenever she felt particularly frustrated with her own financial situation. She'd stumbled across the article during one such search, and intrigued by the acquisition, mention had begun digging deeper. The details of what happened next emerged only later. Emily visiting my condo during a trip to Chicago, ostensibly to catch up, asking to use my bathroom, and then rifling through papers in my home office while I took a work call. She found investment statements, foundation documents, and enough financial breadcrumbs to piece together the reality of my situation. Rather than confronting me directly, she took photos with her phone and returned to our parents with her discovery. Together they planned the confrontation that would occur at our next family dinner. The invitation came from my mother, her voice carrying an unusual insistence. "It's been too long since we've all been together. Isabella, your father and I really want to see you. Emily and Brad will be there too. They have some news to share." Something in her tone triggered a warning bell, but I dismissed it as paranoia. "Sure, Mom, I can drive down next Friday." When I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere felt charged with an unusual tension. My mother hugged me with an intensity that felt performative rather than affectionate. My father lingered in the handshake a moment too long. Emily greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, while Brad nodded awkwardly from behind her. The dinner itself was a masterclass in loaded conversation. My mother mentioned rising property taxes and the strain on their fixed income. Emily complained about their mortgage rate reset and casually mentioned they might need to consider bankruptcy if something didn't change. Brad talked about a development deal that had fallen through, costing them the deposit they'd put down. Each comment was delivered with sideways glances in my direction, as if testing my reaction. I responded with appropriate sympathy, but kept my own financial situation deliberately vague. "It's tough out there," I acknowledged. "The consulting business has its ups and downs too." As my mother served dessert, my favorite apple pie, which should have been another warning sign. Emily set down her fork with deliberate precision. The same deliberate precision she'd used at countless family gatherings when preparing to make an announcement or start an argument. She pushed back her chair and stood reaching into her purse to extract several folded papers. "Before we finish dinner," she said, her voice carrying an edge I recognized from childhood confrontations, "I think we need to address the elephant in the room." She unfolded the papers, printouts of my investment statements with certain numbers highlighted in neon yellow, and placed them on the table. "Our sister, the millionaire, all this time watching us struggle while sitting on a fortune." The words landed like physical blows, each one punctuated by the expressions transforming around the table. My father's eyes widening with surprise, then narrowing with calculation. My mother's momentary shock dissolving into something closer to vindication. Brad, Areen, straightening in his chair, suddenly attentive after an evening of distraction. "Is this true?" my father asked, reaching for the papers with the practiced movement of an accountant accustomed to reviewing financial documents. 6. 8 million. The number hung in the air simultaneously, an accusation and an opportunity. I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment, not at the wealth itself, but at the invasion of privacy it represented. Where did you get these? I asked Emily, my voice tight with controlled emotion. That's your response, she shot back. Not, I'm sorry for lying to everyone, or let me explain why I've been watching Mom and Dad struggle while sitting on millions. The betrayal cut deep. Not just the invasion of my private papers, but the immediate assumption that my wealth made me responsible for their financial woes, that my success was somehow a crime against the family, rather than an achievement to be celebrated. In that moment, looking at the faces around the table, all trained on me with expressions ranging from hurt to entitlement, I realized that the careful boundaries I'd constructed between my financial life and my family relationships had been permanently breached. Whatever came next would irrevocably change those relationships for better or worse. The revelation of my wealth acted like a starter pistol, initiating a race for who could stake their claim first. My mother's pivot was so immediate, so practiced, it suggested she'd been rehearsing her response. Well, this changes everything, she declared, reaching across the table to pat Emily's hand supportively. Emily's underwater on her mortgage by about $200,000. You'll pay it off, right? There was no question in her tone, only the expectation of compliance. My father, typically the quiet one in family confrontations, cleared his throat meaningfully. Your mother and I have been worried about retirement, he said, studying one of the financial statements Emily had provided. Our financial advisor says we need at least another $400,000 to maintain our lifestyle with inflation. And of course there's the second mortgage we took out for Emily's wedding. Emily, emboldened by our parents' directness, produced an actual list from her purse, neatly typed and organized by priority. We've worked out what we need, she announced, sliding the paper toward me. The mortgage payoff, obviously. Then about $70,000 for Brad's new business idea. He's got a concept for luxury pet hotels that's guaranteed to take off. We need a reliable car since the Range Rover is having transmission issues. And we're thinking about private school for when we have kids. So a college fund would be great to start. Now the family ambush continued to escalate as my uncle called my father's phone. Apparently Emily had texted several relatives while I was processing the initial shock. It's Uncle Dave, my father said, answering the call and putting it on speaker. He's wondering if you might help with Cousin Jessica's medical bills. The insurance didn't cover her last procedure. My phone began buzzing with text notifications from extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years, each one containing congratulations, thinly veiling financial requests. The dinner table had transformed into an auction block, where various family needs were being bid against my newly discovered resources. Not once during this flurry of demands did anyone ask how I'd built this wealth, or acknowledge the work it had taken. There were no questions about the years of 18-hour days, the missed holidays, or the health issued from stress during capital flow's most challenging periods. No one expressed pride in what I'd accomplished or curiosity about the business I'd helped build. I was not Isabella the entrepreneur, or Isabella the successful businesswoman. I was merely Isabella the solution to their financial problems. The fifth and most painful hurt crystallized in that moment. The realization that my value to my family was entirely transactional. My mother, sensing my hesitation, deployed the ultimate weapon in her arsenal. Guilt family helps family, Isabella, she said softly, her expression a practiced blend of disappointment and expectation. I changed your diapers. I drove you to all those business club meetings in high school. Your father and I gave you life and raised you. Doesn't that count for something? Emily, never one to be outdone in emotional manipulation, jumped in with her own attack. You owe us. For all those years you acted like you couldn't help more. All those times you said you were just getting by as a consultant while we struggled. Do you know how many nights I've stayed awake worrying about money? How many fights Brad and I have had over bills you could have prevented? That her voice rose with each accusation, face flushed with self-righteous anger. Then came the final blow, the statement that severed something essential inside me. It's not like you earned it anyway, Emily said dismissively. You just got lucky with that company buyout. Anyone could have been in the right place at the right time. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. The sheer injustice of that statement, the erasure of the education I'd pursued, the risks I'd taken. The work I'd done left me momentarily speechless. I felt a strange calm descend, the kind that comes when a difficult decision suddenly becomes very clear. Without a word, I stood from the table, collected my purse, and picked up the financial documents that had been scattered like evidence at a trial. "I need some time to think about all this," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I'll be in touch." I walked out despite their protests and calls to come back and discuss things reasonably. In my car, the tears finally came. Hot streams of hurt and betrayal rolling down my cheeks as I drove away from the house where I'd grown up, but never truly belonged. The family I'd supported, despite their dismissal of my achievements, had revealed their true perception of me, not as a daughter or sister worthy of celebration, but as a financial resource to be tapped whenever their choices created problems. Felt utterly alone in that moment, wealthy beyond what I'd ever imagined possible as a child, yet emotionally bankrupt in the currency that should have mattered most. The drive back to my condo passed in a blur of tears and scattered thoughts. Once home, I mechanically went through the motions of removing my coat and shoes before collapsing onto my sofa. Emotionally drained, my phone had been buzzing continuously since I'd left my parents' house. Texts, voicemails, and emails piling up like digital. I finally turned it off, completely unable to face another demand, disguised as family concern. The silence that followed was both a relief and a painful reminder of my isolation. I curled into myself, allowing the tears to flow freely now that no one was watching. The betrayal felt physical, a hollowing sensation in my chest, as if something vital had been carved away. Around midnight, I reached for my laptop with trembling hands and responded to the one message I could face. A concerned text. From my closest friend, Sophia, family emergency. I wrote, "Can you come over tomorrow? I need someone to talk to." Her response was immediate, despite the late hour. "On my way now." Bringing wine and moral support. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. Sophia took one look at my tear-stained face and pulled me into a fierce hug before ushering me back to the sofa and pouring generous glasses of the Cabernet she'd brought. "Tell me everything," she said, settling beside me. The story poured out of me, Emily's betrayal, my parents' immediate pivot to financial demands, the extended family suddenly emerging from the woodwork with their hands outstretched. Sophia listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly incredulous as I detailed the evening's events. When I finally finished speaking, emotionally exhausted, she shook her head slowly. "Isabella, I need you to hear something, and I need you to really listen," she said, taking my hands in hers. "Your money is yours. You earned it. Every dollar not through luck, but through years of work that no one in that room tonight could or would have done. Their financial problems are the result of their choices, just as your financial success is the result of yours." Her words were like raindrops in a desert, desperately needed, but almost too intense to absorb all at once. "But shouldn't we help family?" I whispered, voicing the doubt that had been planted by years of conditioning. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" Sophia squeezed my hands gently. "There's a difference between helping and enabling," she replied. "And there's a difference between asking and demanding. If Emily had cancer and needed treatment, would you help? Of course. If your parents' house burned down, would you help? Absolutely. But paying off a mortgage on a house they couldn't afford, funding a luxury lifestyle built on poor decisions, that's not help. That's enabling behavior that will never change as long as someone bails them out." We talked until sunrise, dissecting the patterns that had defined my family relationships for decades. Emily's financial irresponsibility, and our parents' enabling response. My achievements consistently overshadowed by my sister's needs. The expectation that I would provide support without requiring recognition or gratitude in return. By the time Sophia left, promising to check in later, I felt wrung out, but somehow lighter, as if naming these patterns had diminished their power over me. The weekend stretched before me like empty canvas. I canceled my work commitments, silenced my phone, except for calls from Sophia, and gave myself permission to process what had happened without interruption. I journaled extensively, filling pages with memories and patterns I'd never fully acknowledged. The the trophy gathering dust in my childhood bedroom while Emily's achievements were showcased, the financial help I'd provided over the years, always accompanied by the implied message that it wasn't quite enough, the careful construction of my successful but not wealthy persona to protect myself from exactly the situation that had now unfolded. On Monday morning, I called Dr. Rivera, the therapist I'd started seeing during Capital Flow's most stressful period. She made time for an emergency session that afternoon. "What you're describing is a profound boundary violation," she said after I'd recounted the dinner confrontation. "But I'm more concerned about the underlying dynamic that made this situation possible. You've been using money as a substitute for the approval you never got from your family, sending checks instead of setting boundaries. That pattern won't bring you peace, Isabella, no matter how much money you have." Her observation struck with the force of recognition, a truth I'd been circling, but hadn't fully faced. My financial success, kept secret from my family, had been both shield and sword, protecting me from their demands, while allowing me to maintain a relationship on their terms. But that protection had come at the cost of authenticity and had ultimately failed anyway. "What do I do now?" I asked, feeling simultaneously lost and on the verge of something important. "They're expecting me to solve all their financial problems. If I refuse, I'm the villain of the story." Dr. Rivera's response was measured but firm. "You need to take control of the narrative. Right now, they're writing the story, one where your wealth obligates you to solve their problems. You need to write a different story, one where your boundaries are clear and your value isn't, determined by what you can provide financially." By Wednesday, the constant barrage of messages from my family had evolved from expectant to angry. My mother's most recent voicemail contained thinly veiled threats about being cut off from the family if I didn't step up and do the right thing. My father had sent an email with detailed calculations of how my financial assistance would benefit everyone in the long run. Emily's texts had devolved into name-calling and accusations of selfishness. Each message reinforced the rightness of the decision that was crystallizing in my mind. That evening, I drafted an email to my parents, Emily and Brad, requesting a meeting at my condo on Saturday afternoon. The message was brief and neutral in tone, offering no hints about my decision, but making it clear that I would address the financial revelations and their requests at that time. After sending it, I felt a surge of empowerment. For the first time since the disastrous dinner, I was setting the terms of engagement rather than reacting to their demands. The next 2 days were spent in careful preparation, not just of what I would say, but of how I would present myself and my boundaries. This confrontation would define my family relationships moving forward, and I needed to approach it from a position of strength and clarity rather than hurt and defensiveness. By Saturday morning, I was ready to face my family, not as the beautiful daughter or the responsible sister, but as a woman who had built something valuable and deserved respect for more than just her bank balance. At precisely 3 hours on Saturday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothed down the crisp white blouse I'd paired with tailored black pants, my power outfit, the one I wore to important business meetings, and opened the door to face my family. Their expressions as they entered my condo spoke volumes, my mother's eyes darting around to assess the value of everything in sight, my father's uncomfortable shuffle as he noted the view of Lake Michigan from my living room windows, Emily's barely concealed resentment as she took in the tasteful but clearly expensive furnishings, Brad's awkward attempt to appear casual, while mentally calculating square footage and property values. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the arranged seating in my living room. I remained standing, a deliberate choice to establish the dynamic of this meeting. My family settled onto the sofa and armchairs, an expectant silence filling the room. The coffee table between us held a single folder and a picture of water with glasses. No snacks, no coffee. Nothing to suggest a social gathering. This was a business meeting and I would conduct it as such. "Thank you for coming." I began, my voice steadier than I had expected. "I've had some time to process what happened at dinner last week and I want to address it directly. Yes, I am financially successful. Yes, the figure Emily discovered is accurate. What I want to talk about today is how we got here and where we go from here." I opened the folder and removed several photographs, old snapshots I'd collected over the years. Me at 12 with my dog walking business flyers. Me at 16 with my business competition trophy. Me during my college graduation standing alone while other families clustered around their graduates. Me in the tiny first office of Capital Flow, surrounded by empty coffee cups and takeout containers at 2A. This is the journey to that number you're also focused on, I said, laying each photo on the coffee table. It started with a 12-year-old girl who saved her dog walking money while her parents were busy with her sister's dance recital. It continued with 16, our days and countless sacrifices. I looked directly at each family member as I continued. The money you're now asking me to share wasn't inherited or won in a lottery. It came from years of work that none of you noticed or valued. I went without salary for 8 months, during our startup's most challenging period. I developed stress-induced health issues that I'm still managing. I sacrificed relationships and personal milestones because building something sustainable was important to me. The room remained silent, their expressions a mixture of discomfort and stubborn expectation. I turned to address each person individually, starting with Emily. You went through my personal papers and violated my privacy, I said, holding her gaze steadily despite her attempt to look away. You've made choices to live beyond your means repeatedly, and you've never faced consequences because someone, usually our parents, occasionally me, has always rescued you. You said I just got lucky erasing years of education and hard work that built the foundation for that luck to matter. Emily's face flushed with anger. But before she could respond, I turned to my mother. You've always enabled Emily while expecting me to be responsible. When I achieved something, you barely acknowledged it, before pivoting to what Emily needed. You've never shown interest in my successes, only in what I could provide. You re-mortgaged your retirement security for Emily's wedding and luxury home, then expected me to solve the financial problems that decision created. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing with indignation, but I continued before she could interrupt. And Dad, I said, turning to my father, whose gaze dropped to his hands. You've stood by and watched this dynamic play out for years without intervening. You've allowed financial decisions that endangered your future because confrontation was uncomfortable. You taught me about accounting, but never about standing up for myself. I stepped back physically and emotionally, creating space between myself and their reactions. I am not your bank, I stated clearly. I will not pay off debts that resulted from poor choices. I will not fund lifestyles that aren't sustainable. The mortgage underwater because you bought more house than you could afford. The luxury pet hotel business with no business plan. The credit card debt from impulsive purchases. These are consequences of choices, not emergencies deserving of bailouts. The explosion I'd expected came right on cue. Emily jumped to her feet, face contorted with rage. How dare you judge our choices? You've been lying to us for years. You could have helped, but chose not to while watching us struggle. My mother joined in, her voice sharp with righteous indignation. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay family with judgment and lectures. Where is your compassion? My father remained silent, but his expression had hardened into something between disappointment and calculation. Brad shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. I waited for the initial outburst to subside, maintaining my composure despite the emotional onslaught. When the room quieted slightly, I continued. I'm willing to have a relationship with anyone here who can respect my boundaries. I'm willing to discuss helping with true emergencies or meaningful opportunities like education, but I am not an ATM for impulse purchases, bailouts, and luxury lifestyles. I removed a second set of documents from my folder. I've established a family educational trust that will pay for legitimate educational expenses for any family member, including future children. I've also created an emergency medical fund that can be accessed for genuine health crisis. These are the ways I'm willing to share my financial resources to create opportunity and security, not to enable destructive patterns. Emily snatched her purse from the sofa, her movements jerky with anger. Keep your charity, don't need your conditions and judgment, she spat, storming toward the door with Brad trailing awkwardly behind her. Don't call me when you change your mind about what family means. My mother stood more slowly, her expression a masterpiece of martyred disappointment. I never thought my own daughter would turn her back on family this way, she said, her voice trembling, with what might have been genuine emotion or practiced manipulation. After years of such performances, it was hard to tell the difference. My father hesitated, looking between my mother and me, as if trying to calculate the cost of each potential decision. Ultimately, he followed my mother to the door with a last glance, back that contained something I couldn't quite interpret. Perhaps regret, perhaps respect, or simply resignation. As the door closed behind them, I remained standing in my living room surrounded by the photographs that documented my journey. The confrontation had gone largely as I'd expected, yet the finality of it struck me with unexpected force. I had drawn a line that my family couldn't or wouldn't respect, and in doing so, I'd likely altered those relationships permanently. The grief of that reality mingled with an unfamiliar sensation of liberation. I had finally spoken my truth without apology or compromise. For the first time in my life, I'd valued my boundaries more than their approval, and despite the pain of their rejection, I knew I'd made the right choice. The weeks following the confrontation brought a silence so complete, it seemed to have physical weight. No calls from my mother with thinly disguised requests for financial assistance. No texts from Emily announcing her latest crisis. Even the extended family members who had emerged from the woodwork upon learning of my wealth retreated back into the shadows when word spread that I wasn't distributing funds as expected. The silence wasn't entirely peaceful. It carried the ache of absence, the grief of relationships fundamentally altered. There were moments when I reached for my phone to share a small triumph or ask about a family tradition, only to remember the chasm that now existed between us. Dr. Rivera helped me navigate these moments, reminding me that grief for relationships that have changed is normal and necessary. You're mourning the family you wished you had, she explained during one particularly difficult session. Not the family that actually exists. That's an important distinction. Despite the emotional complexity of this period, I found myself experiencing an unexpected sense of liberation. Decisions about my time, my resources, and my priorities were now truly my own, unencumbered by the weight of unspoken family expectations. I deepened my friendship with Sophia, who had stood by me throughout the confrontation and its aftermath. We began a Sunday brunch tradition, sharing achievements and challenges with the kind of mutual support I'd always craved from family. I expanded my circle of authentic relationships. People who knew my financial status but valued me for my character, insight, and companionship, rather than what I could provide. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I met with Aaron Goldstein, a financial advisor, specializing in wealth management for first-generation affluent clients. Many of my clients struggle with similar family dynamics, he told me. The person who creates significant wealth often faces unique challenges in establishing boundaries with family members who don't understand the journey that led to that wealth. Together, we created a structured giving plan that aligned with my values: education, entrepreneurship, and emergency security, while establishing clear boundaries around impulse requests and lifestyle subsidies. I formalized the Family Educational Trust and Emergency Medical Fund I'd mentioned during the confrontation, ensuring they would be available regardless of the current state of our relationships. Beyond family considerations, I expanded my philanthropic efforts through the foundation I'd established. Working with educational experts, we developed a comprehensive scholarship program for young women, entrepreneurs from middle-class backgrounds, girls who, like me, had the drive and vision, but limited financial resources or family support. The first cohort of scholarship recipients filled me with more pride than any investment return ever had. The foundation work provided purpose and perspective, reminding me that the true value of wealth lay in its potential for positive impact, rather than status or acquisition. The first crack in the familial silence came 6 weeks after the confrontation. My father called on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice hesitant on the line. "I've been thinking about what you said." He began the words, coming slowly, as if each required conscious effort about standing by and not intervening about endangering our retirement for Emily's choices. We spoke for nearly an hour. The longest, most honest conversation we'd had in years, possibly ever. He didn't apologize directly, but his acknowledgement of the patterns I'd identified felt like a significant step. "Your mother and I have been talking with a financial advisor," he said near the end of the call, "trying to figure out how to secure our retirement without expecting you to solve it for us." The awkward olive branch touched me more deeply than I'd anticipated. "I think that's really wise, Dad," I replied, careful not to overwhelm this fragile new connection with too much emotion. "If you'd like, I could recommend someone who specializes in retirement planning." My mother maintained her distance longer, her pride apparently wounded beyond quick repair. When my birthday arrived 2 months after the confrontation, I received a card in the mail store, bought with a generic message inside and a stiff "Love Mom" beneath it. Not a full reconciliation by any means, but a small acknowledgement of my continued existence in her life. Emily proved the most resistant to the new boundaries. Her texts oscillated between anger, still playing the victim with your millions, and thinly disguised attempts to circumvent the boundaries I'd established. Not asking for money, just wondering if you'd co-sign a loan for Brad's business, I responded consistently, acknowledging the former with silence and the latter with clear, firm refusals. 6 months after the confrontation, my parents invited me to dinner. Just us. My father specified on the phone, "Emily and Brad have other plans." The evening was tentative conversations, carefully navigating around sensitive topics, but it represented progress. Nonetheless, my mother actually asked about my foundation work, showing more interest in my professional life than she had in decades. My father mentioned they'd downsized to a smaller house, a practical financial decision that suggested they were indeed taking steps toward self-sufficiency. As dessert was served, my mother cleared her throat. "We're trying, Olivia," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "This is unfamiliar territory for us." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement that change was necessary and underway. "I know, Mom," I replied gently. "It's unfamiliar for me too, but I think it's worth the effort." Not all relationships healed at the same pace or to the same degree. Emily maintained her distance, occasionally sending messages that suggested she was still waiting for me to come to my senses about financial support. Some extended family members disappeared entirely once it became clear that my boundaries were firm. Others gradually established new, healthier connections based on genuine interest rather than financial expectation. A year after the confrontation that had changed everything, I sat in a coffee shop across from Amara Johnson, the first recipient of my foundation's entrepreneurship scholarship. At 17, she reminded me powerfully of myself at that age. Determined, insightful, and hungry for opportunity, she'd used the scholarship to develop a mobile app, connecting elderly community members with student helpers for everyday tasks, creating both employment for her peers and support for seniors. Never thought someone would believe in my idea enough to fund it. She told me, her eyes bright with pride, as she showed me the latest usage statistics. "My family tries to be supportive, but they don't really get what I'm trying to build." The familiar words sparked recognition rather than pain. "Keep building anyway," I advised her. "The right people will see your vision, even if they're not the people you originally hoped would see it." As I watched her leave the coffee shop, laptop tucked under her arm and mind clearly racing with new ideas, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The journey from that devastating family dinner to this moment had been painful, but necessary. I had learned that financial wealth magnifies who people already are. I had discovered that true wealth includes self-respect and healthy boundaries, not just numbers and investment accounts. Most importantly, I had found that family isn't just defined by blood, but by mutual respect, support, and understanding. Some blood relationships may never fully heal, but they can transform into something different, perhaps less intimate, but more honest. And we can build chosen families that provide the recognition and support our birth families cannot. Walking home through the autumn afternoon, I reflected on the strange path that had led from my childhood dog walking business to this moment. The wealth I'd built had cost me certain illusions about family relationships, but it had given me the freedom to define success on my own terms, not through external validation or approval, but through impact, authenticity, and self-respect. In the end, that freedom was worth more than any number in my investment portfolio. What would you do if a family member suddenly exposed your financial success to others who immediately saw you as their solution? Would you set firm boundaries like Isabella, or would you approach the situation differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that. Setting financial boundaries with family is both necessary and courageous. Thank you for coming on this journey with me today. And remember, true wealth isn't just about money in the bank, but about having the courage to define your own worth beyond what you can provide to others.